Welcome to Reroll Multiple Martial Arts podcast, where we discuss the intersections of martial arts, society, and culture. And today we want to revisit and continue the conversation with Dani's martial arts journey, because he's trained in Kenjutsu Ryu, Karate, Taekwondo, traditional Japanese weapons, Shotokan Karate, Judo, Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, and Muay Thai. And so, Dani, you're currently training in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu and Muay Thai.
Yeah, I recently started Muay Thai, mainly out of actually talking to you about training Muay Thai. It was an art that I knew of, but I hadn't really considered.
Why haven't you considered it?
Well, I was rooted in traditional martial arts, but it's incomplete. My version of traditional martial arts was a Japanese Budo background. And what I mean by that is that in Japan, there's a couple of, like state officially recognized martial arts. Judo is one of them. Karate is another. Kendo, Aido, and there's a couple others. And I'd say they're state sponsored. Literally, the state does offer a space, offers funding. It puts it forward as like, this is the martial art of our country. I didn't know that when I was 13 and I was training in Kenjutsu. And Kenjutsu became part of karate as an Okinawan tradition that later was appropriated by Japan. Japan takes it over. So there's a little bit of tension. In fact, in Okinawa, there's a lot of people that feel very insulted to make this a Japanese art because they were taken over by Japan. So that's the context that I think I'm stumbling to kind of talk about as to why I was rooted in that Budo martial art. So that if it was Japanese, I thought it was part of like the official bookshelf of martial arts. And if it wasn't, I was a little bit skeptical or not interested, or it just felt farther away.
Because, I started doing Muay Thai because I thought that it was just seeing so many, it was very practical. It was useful in, in the octagon, I guess. And, it seemed like something that kind of was very challenging to a lot of more traditional martial arts. Because my understanding, like, 'cause I was looking into, some of the histories, like, for example, like Dutch kickboxing is a, combination of Muay Thai, karate, American, so-called Western boxing and stuff like that. Partially because in the 80s, a lot of the Muay Thai guys were beating up, the karate guys and some other stuff, or at least winning those competitions. And so the Dutch guys, and some other folks kind of had to rework their game a little bit. And then, from my understanding, that's how Dutch kickboxing came about. And that's part of why I wanted to do Muay Thai. But I respect that, learning other cultural things. I think it kind of brings out a lot of other ideas or arguments, I guess, because there's a lot of people say, oh, this style of kung fu doesn't work or this doesn't work. But not every martial art is made or evolved to fight or compete. A lot of these martial arts, for example, Shaolin Kung Fu, it evolved into a health, a health practice because back in the day, a lot of these war generals became monks. They didn't want to deal with war anymore. So a bunch of these guys, went to the Shaolin Temple and then they practiced their style of kung fu, which kind of everybody's style kind of meshed. And because they weren't fighting in the battlefield, it just evolved into something that was strengthening the body.
I agree. I think there's a space of looking at how each martial art is part of a different community. But for a lot of people, they don't necessarily see it or are interested in that. Because when you pose the question of like, why did it take you so long to try Muay Thai? My first response is is that sincere one. Like Muay Thai felt really not exotic, but far of what I felt was something that I had invested, because I maybe it's my immaturity, and I say that in the most innocent of ways. That as a 13-year-old kid, I fell in love with everything that was going on in my dojo. I fell in love with the fact that when I entered the dojo, and it was a Salvation Army recreation center, upstairs, a room, small room, that would magically become transformed twice a week because my sensei created protocols. We entered, we bowed, we knelt, we lined up, we did sesan, which is a little bit of meditation. Everything was like call and response. I didn't associate it with military instruction. As an adult, I'm like, wow, that is so military. I didn't associate it, but I did associate it with something special. And I associate it with Japan. And here's where I want to point out. Kenjutsu Ryu is not from Japan. It's from Okinawa. And Okinawa, as an island, has a very tense relationship with Japan as a colonial power. The native people of Okinawa would be injured by me taking away their authenticity as native people that produced Kenjutsu Ryu. But I was just a kid. I didn't know better. I thought it was all Japanese. And that led me to judo. That led me to Shotokan, which is another. That led me to Aikido. So I don't know if you can catch this pattern. It's like, wow, this dude was just all Japanese. And I didn't think like that, but I feel that's what I was doing. So Muay Thai was way off the grid. I was gonna have to go to another country, and that's literally what happened. And then when you and I started talking, and you started training, all of a sudden I was like, I'm gonna give it a shot. And by that time, I had trained easily 30 years in some type of Okinawan or / Japanese martial art. But I gave it a shot, and I was like, wow, this is so much different. I like it.
With having trained so many different styles, have you adopted something that's unique to yourself in a little bit? Certain habits or certain ways of moving your body that that would maybe be considered. Would you consider yourself a mixed martial artist or a multiple martial artist?
I never did. In fact, I want to pause to just hear what your question. Do I consider myself a mixed martial artist or a multiple martial artist? I would actually find it hard to even consider myself a martial artist, only because of this. I never really thought that I was doing something different. So something special. So when I started training and I was 13, I'll tell you what happened. Immediately, my sensei told all of us, I don't want you telling your friends that you take Kenjutsu. And then we're like, why not? He's like, I don't want you guys fighting. I don't want you to show this outside. And I think all he was trying to do is keep us out of trouble. So I didn't say anything. I was in junior high. I would go. It's funny because I was so I was so enamored with what I was doing that during like lunch, I was doing my katas. But I would do them pacing, if it makes sense. Like I would keep everything really tight, and you would just see me moving in certain patterns. And what is this guy doing? It's like I was going through my kata in my head, and you could see my arms kind of like moving in a certain direction for blocks and punches. But I knew that I couldn't share it because at that time I felt that it would just get me in trouble. And as I got older, then it became not cool. Like karate was cool when you were 13, but not when you were 18. That was the joke. Like, you're still doing that? That's for little kids. And then when I went to college, it became a college thing. But yet I never thought that I was a martial artist. I do recall seeing martial artists or believing that I had encountered people that would be worthy of that title. And I'm being kind of silly with that phrase. But like my senseis, like my sensei from Kenjutsu, Sensei Rio's, he would enter and he just commanded presence. And I thought it was just my own memory of it, but I've seen video of him from that time period, and that's how he walked. He walked like an old school, like samurai. Like he just seemed like he was always wearing his gi underneath his shirts, if it makes sense. And that's what I always thought martial artists were. Like they walked the planet ready to fight. But so that wasn't me. I was not that dude. I was the guy that would go and train, but I didn't own it. I didn't own that I was training something that made me different. So when you ask me that question today, I never got to that point. Even when I started training Shotokan, which is the longest one I did, and eventually reached Shodan level, which is a level of respect. You get a black belt. You know, even then I found it hard to say, oh, am I a martial artist?
So have you sparred in I guess a mixed martial arts context where, you can use your Brazilian Jiu Jitsu moves or your stand-up game?
I did unofficially. There was this guy named Sammy years ago. This is like 10 years ago. So I wasn't training jiu-jitsu formally, but I was taking grappling classes. I had taken maybe a year worth of grappling classes. And I call them grappling classes because they were jiu-jitsu, but they were taught no-gi, and the instructor used the word grappling. Now it's more appropriate to call it no-gi jiu-jitsu or no-gi grappling. But I was doing that, and I met this guy who was a fighter, a street fighter. That was his thing. He was my neighbor. He was a good dude. And he was taking eskrima, kali. And we would talk about it. And again, that's one of the martial arts that I also want to learn. Eskrima, stick fighting, Filipino martial arts. Dani no Santo is one of the people that I've always respected. And I've been following him since I was a kid. I remember getting the black belt magazines with my buddies. We would, after junior high, go to the bookstore and get them. Anyway, the point is that he's telling me about eskrima and he's telling me about jiu-jitsu and the guard. And I'm like, oh, I'm doing some of that. And then here's what he says. He says, hey, we should go spar. I'm like, yeah, let's do it. And he's like, okay. He's like, but I want you, and this should have been the red flag. He's like, but I don't want you to pull any punches on me. Like, you go full all out on me, and I will try and defend myself. And I must have been daydreaming because I was like, well, okay, let's do this. And we went to the rec center and closed the doors. But it was funny because it worked out well. I remember knowing that I found it really weird that my kicks didn't make any sense. Like I was doing roundhouse kicks, and the roundhouse kick in Shotokan is a little bit different than the roundhouse kick in Muay Thai. The roundhouse kick in Muay Thai is like a bat all the way through, full swing. The roundhouse kick in Shotokan is one that strikes halfway into the curve, does impact, and bounces back. So think about swinging a back fist from your elbow and bring it back. Kind of like that. And he was catching it. He was catching it and he was throwing me. And again, he's being kind because he was not pounding me in the face once he caught me and threw me. But he did want me to hit him, which was dysfunctional. And I was like, okay, let me try this. And after a while, I caught what he was doing. So I was able to eventually figure out that whatever I threw, he would catch. And anyway, so throughout that day of sparring, it was interesting that it was a learning experience. I can say that like one of the things that I found was that I was able to use a little bit of like Aikido, misdirection, stepping aside. So he would throw. At one point, I had my leg forward, and he was lunging at it. And when he lunged, I took it away, and he fell forward. I took his back, and did a rear naked choke. But I want to be very clear that he was being very kind. Not for one moment do I believe that I would have been able to beat him. It was like sparring with someone that is about 5 levels above you. Like I just felt it. I was like, yeah, this guy, I would not have a chance if he went all out. Because his level of fighting was more practice and application than I had. I had a lot of practice doing roundhouse kicks. I would say I've kicked by that time 10,000 times. But I can assure you that he had probably, 30 fights, easy. I knew that day that I went to spar with him, he had just had a fight that Friday night. And when I say a fight, it's not an MMA fight for points. It's a fight on the street because that's what... Anyway, so that's my point. But I did learn a lot. That's my point. I learned a lot from that session. And I've had other versions of it, but the other versions were too controlled to even feel that I learned anything from them.
Wait, so was he doing like backyard fights and stuff like that, or just straight up picking fights at the bar?
Both. He was always trying to test himself.
Wow,
he was learning, and he had a temper. So people didn't know he was small. He was I don't know, 5'6", but strong. 5'6", maybe 180, 190. Yes, like that, buff. And people would pick on him. And he would destroy 6 feet tall dudes. So to your point, I learned a lot of that from that session. That was probably the most real. The other versions that I've had, looking back, they were, like I said, I think I made a comment about feeling embarrassed of having a fight outside of a grocery store when I was in college. That night, I remember it, and I remember the techniques I used, what worked, what didn't. I remember that at one point I didn't know what that was called, but I did a double leg takedown. Like I went for the hips and swept the guy and landed on top of him. Like I was sitting on his stomach at the end. This is before I knew jiu-jitsu. But somehow that happened. I don't know why that happened, but I think there's these elements of me learning all these different things. But just to try and answer your question, during this period, I never felt I was a martial artist because I never gave myself that title. I reserved it for a few. Like I thought of my Sensei Otis, as a martial artist, the way he taught, the way he knew so much. And I was like, nah, I'm just a student. I just take a couple classes. Even if I said, oh, but you've been doing it for 10 years and you just tested and you got a black belt. You're like, yeah, but I don't know. I'll keep turning. But let me ask you that question, because I'm curious. Do you see that title as something like a martial artist? Is it something that you can define?
I don't consider myself a quote unquote martial artist because I feel like it takes a lifetime of devotion to kind of achieve that. It's kind of like, the traditional, you know, I work out and I go to the gym and I practice this skill. And, I've, you know, um, hit the bags, spar, but it's still a hobby at the end of the day. And, you know, a martial artist is, to me, is somebody who kind of, like those Thai guys that adopt the last name of their gym because they live there and eat there. Like, oh, okay, those guys are martial artists. But me, yeah, I practice Muay Thai. I, I'm not a, you know, I practice martial arts, but I don't think I'm a martial artist. It's still a, um, it's not my top tier. It's not my top priority. You know, it's probably like number five or something, or six.
Let me ask you this. Is it something that you see yourself walking toward?
Definitely, definitely. You know, ever since that first day, that one class I did BJJ with you, that was great. I mean, like, yeah, I mean, I was in grad school and I couldn't find the time to do it. Thinking back now, I'm like, yeah, I could probably find the time. Like, even talking with you, going through training during grad school, but I would love to, add to my skill set. Yeah, I know it. I know enough standing up. I can, handle myself sparring in Muay Thai, but jiu-jitsu is another language that I want to learn. Judo is something I want to learn. Kali Eskrima is something I want to learn. Um, and I want to, you know, learn, like it's like learn. I want to learn all these instruments because I want to play music with everybody. I want to dance with everybody. Learn all the moves. But a lot of it's time and money.
I'm thinking about this context of the term martial artist as something that may not resonate with everyone. Meaning, for some people, they may think of this conversation as useless because it goes like this. What's the difference? You meet one person who's been training for 10 years, and you meet another person who's been training for 3 years. They both have equal skill sets. They both can demonstrate that they know the art. What would make one person a martial artist and a person just a hobby practitioner if it's not based on their skill? Because I'm going to try and say that the skill set is part of it. And when I say that I never used it for myself, it's because I felt as I got older that I would be faking it. In fact, I think it's appropriate to think about the imposter syndrome that many of us carry in our respective capacities, whether you're a teacher going for the first time in front of the class and you're like, oh my goodness, do they know that I don't know everything? That's how I felt when I thought about the senseis I've had. I don't know if they felt insecure, but they definitely demonstrated so much security. And to me, that's what the martial artist was. And one of the things that I think about is that I feel that I can call back moments where other people saw me as a martial artist under the definition that I just put forward. And I'll say it in this way. I remember one time, one of my classmates, he has his own dojo, and he said, Dani, can you come in and cover for me? And by that time, I already had my black belt, and I was so nervous. It was going to be my very first time teaching. But I had been to that dojo several times as like a guest because, my buddy is teaching. So I go to his class. So they knew me. And by that point, every time I went, the students gave me a level of respect that made me so uncomfortable. Not because I didn't think I was worthy, but because it was confusing. I was like, who are you looking at? Like, I wanted to look back and say, like, who's behind me? Because your eyes are giving me this vision of someone that I don't recognize. And I remember thinking that I was very respectful to all the students. I was caring. I carried myself with respect and confidence, but I wasn't trying to appear more than I was. In a sense, I wasn't going to show a fancy move because I don't have fancy moves. So I just think those weird moments of realizing, like, I know that I don't use that word, but I remember certain moments in the past where I have felt that it was given to me because of the way that the context permitted. And maybe that's why this is such a hard question, because for some people, they don't care about that. So I've been training in jiu-jitsu for a long time, and I can tell you that in the dojos that I've been, they do carry a lot of the Budo philosophy, the Bushido philosophy. Again, I'm being very Japanese centric. But for some people in jiu-jitsu, they're like, I just want to compete. I care nothing about hierarchy. I care nothing about tradition. I care nothing about carrying myself with respect. Surprisingly, though, those people at least in the dojos I've been, were not welcomed. They were asked to leave. They were like, you're not someone that we really want to invest in. We don't want to care, and we hope that you don't hurt us, so you should probably leave. And I think that's something that is there throughout the idea of the martial artist. There's something that's more greater than just skill set.
Well, with that said, this has been the Reroll Martial Arts Podcast, where we discuss the intersections between martial arts, society, and culture. Until next time, peace.
Late.